here. As she said, I'm Leanna Schooley. I'm Assistant Director for the Center for Texas Studies at TCU. We do this program the first Saturday of every month, January through May and September through December. It is generously funded by the Summerlee Foundation that enables us to bring these great speakers to you every month. If you are not on our mailing list and would like to receive our mail-outs reminding you about the monthly programs, be sure that I have your email address on our list as you go out the door, and I will add you to it so you'll receive all the future announcements. Now, I don't want to take up too much time. Today, I want to get right to our speaker. Paul Camfield, as I'm sure all of you know, is the son of Bill Camfield, who's most commonly known, I think, is Icky Twerp among a certain generation of all of us. I grew up knowing who Icky Twerp was because my mom was a big fan. And I knew Paul through our museum work. We were both museum people, museum professionals. When he was working in Fredericksburg at the Gillespie County Historical Society. Some of you may have visited down there. He moved from there in 2005 and is currently the Director of Alumni Relations for Schreiner College in Kerrville. But his side job is protecting, preserving the family archive, the Camfield family archive, and some of the terrific pieces that his dad saved over the years, some of the film, the pictures, that were part of that great story that are part of so many of our memories growing up in North Texas. So I'm going to let Paul show you some artifacts that he's brought with him today, and so we're going to have some slides of photos, and we're going to see some film before we're done. So please welcome Paul Camfield.
Okay, hey everybody, thank y'all for coming. Thank you for coming. Is the mic level okay?
Yes.
Good enough? I've been racing around, as you saw me before, coming in to get this thing put together. So I'll get going in the flow. As Leanna said, I'm very fortunate that when my father passed away, and even before my father passed away, that he had collected a good amount of things from not only his the different facets of his time at KTVT, which included Slam Bang Theater, but different ephemera and other things that from his time there. And so pretty early on, I knew, it was something, that was very special to me and my family. And when I got into the museum field in the early 90s, I learned a little bit more about what to do and got more into looking deeper into what was there, because it's always been in boxes and stuff. So really back in that time frame, I just started wrapping my mind around what it was that Dad had saved. Phil Crow is in the audience today, and Phil is going to co-present with me. If any of y'all were in Thurber 5 or 6 years ago, and you've maybe heard Phil talk, Phil was a close colleague, best friend, was right in step with my father every inch of the way in the early years, was witnessing KTVT almost on a daily basis, had a full career at Channel 11, and so he is the voice of the real life. I'm just his son, and not just to say just, but without Phil in the room today, the memory bank of what you're going to learn would be incomplete. So I'm going to go through the PowerPoint presentation, and then we'll bring Phil down there and we can get our audio visual. We'll play some sketches. But again, I'm honored for you guys to take the time. How many of you guys learned about this through the Facebook world? Yeah, some of you guys just read it in other places. So back in 2009, a lady by the name of Beth Fitzgerald started a Facebook group for the Slam Bang. I didn't. She started it. And there's over 6,000 people on this fans of Slam Bang Theater, which is a very humbling understanding of all of you guys like myself that were raised in this part of the world back in the day. So I'm grateful for y'all to take the time, and I'm going to make my way, hopefully stay on time with the presentation as we tell the story of my dad and his career. My dad was born in Mineral Wells in 1929. And there he is with my grandmother and my grandfather. And he was born very humble means. My grandfather worked in the coal mines in Thurber in the brick plants. And that is the earliest days, of my dad's early years. My grandmother, Nina, was born in Alabama, made her way to Thurber around the turn of the century, and she and my grandfather met in Thurber, and that's where they began their life. My grandmother and my grandfather both were illiterate, had barely an education, just hardworking people, and they had a previous daughter, Barbara, who passed away in infancy in the influenza epidemic, and so my father was an only child. Here's a crusty old photograph taken of my grandfather and one of his brothers. All my grandfather's brothers, the Camfields, worked at one time or another in the Thurber brick plant or the coal mines. And that's what led Leanna to ask me to do that presentation at the Thurber Museum, was because there's a linkage between our family and Thurber, and that's what led that presentation at that point. Later in life, around 1980 or so, my dad and I went up to the cemetery above Thurber and found the graves of his sister and of some other extended family that are up there above Thurber. It's a really, really cool experience for me in that time period. Here's a photograph of my dad as a little fella. You can see the what do you call that, protecto guard bars on the window. Must have been a rough neighborhood, or it was just the way it was, or that's to keep critters out, I don't know. You know, again, the story of my father is coming, like a lot of folks in North Texas of our parents' generation, coming from poverty, coming from just humble means, farmers, ranchers, working folks like many of you and your grandparents. My dad lost his father when he was about 4 or 5 years old. My grandfather had cancer, probably untreated. So fairly early on in his life, it was just my father and his mom. She picked up and moved to Fort Worth over on the east side, the north side. And for the rest of my dad's childhood, as he made his way through Carter Riverside and elementary school up until the time that he started forming his career, he and my grandmother just moved from relative to relative to relative, living in the back rooms and just kind of on the generosity of their kinfolk. This is a photograph taken of my dad probably as a teenager somewhere around. How many of y'all remember in your family of those of us that have grandparents, whatever, that got their pictures taken downtown Fort Worth? A lot of us remember that, right? Probably different locations, but different times we've got those in our collections of our kinfolk from Fort Worth. And a lot of you guys, that's some early photographs you've got of your relatives. So my dad starts into school, and what I learned later, though my father never really told me in his own time period, but his relatives told me after he passed away, that my dad showed an unbelievable intellectual aptitude, way beyond the normal of what they recognized. And again, the bulk of my dad's immediate kinfolk are laborers, just good working stock. Most of them didn't have a high school education. And my dad begins in school like everyone else, and he begins to find his place in the world. And that is definitely through creative writing, acting, those kind of things. He showed an aptitude for it early on. When he was about 10 or 11 years old, he got kicked in the head playing football, and always had a blind side, and never was into sports much after that. You know, he had a fairly good, hard peripheral vision, so he was more scholarly than into student athletics, and he attributed some of that. But he has a great time coming out of Carter Riverside High School, starts forming, you know, what later on would become his talents and skills as a writer, as a creator, imagineer, if you want. Again, he reflected a little bit, and a lot of my father's contemporaries from Carter Riverside are no longer living. Every once in a while I'll hear from someone who was someone new, someone that went to school with Dad or others, and there's quite a large Carter Riverside Facebook group. And every once in a while I'll hear from people, but he started forming his idea of what he wanted to. Here he is in some sort of a play there at Carter Riverside, so he's starting to find his way, what he wants to do. A big turning point in his life, and Phil might allude to this because he knew it firsthand, is that at some point my dad meets Paul Young. And Paul Young, in the time period, in the 1940s, was a premier clown with Ringling Brothers. Okay? We all know Emmett Kelly, and Emmett Kelly is one of the most renowned, but Paul Young in his time period, I think, Phil, would he come down and do winter work or summer? He was making extra money coming down to Fort Worth, is that right? And he befriended my father and took my father under his wing, or mutually, and this is where my father got his training in slapstick comedy from Paul Young. and which obviously formulates, a mindset about how he approached comedy, going on into slam bang theater and other things, of which Lavender Louie here can honestly attribute some great physical comedy that these guys went into in the day. But this was an important relationship with my dad, and he is probably out of high school and before college. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. I am named for Paul Young and St. Paul. That's my namesake, Paul Camfield, but he named me after this special person and St. Paul because he's Episcopalian. The next turn of events in my dad's life is because, again, he had no money to go to school, had not met my mother yet, and he somehow got wind about writing scholarships to maybe win some money and be able to get in to pursue education at TCU. And I wish he was here to tell you the story in his own way, and maybe Phil can allude to it. But he entered a contest, and some of the prize money that my dad won enabled him to have some spending money to get going in his college career. Now, my dad didn't go all the way through. He stopped and started twice, but he finished up and graduated in '57. What year did you graduate, Phil? 59. So, and a lot of the contemporary, Frank Benton, what I found the other day, Frank, is that Benton won a writing award in 1955 in this thing, which I did not know that Frank had done that. So a lot of the guys that ended up at KT were all TCU guys, many of them were. But this was a big turning point in my dad's life about getting an education and finding a way to a professional career. He did tell me years ago that he did consider going away with the circus, seriously considered wanting to be in the circus with that influence of Paul Young. But I believe, the nomadic lifestyle or other things tripped his, ability to stay a little closer to home and pursue that. So he gets that degree. He starts in the early days of radio, TV in Fort Worth. He worked for Leonard's Department Store, writing advertising copy. And the thing that, again, some of you know this better than I do, and Phil's going to attest to this, everything is out on the fly. Not on the fly about not planning, but content for everything was coming out of your imagination. And one of the blessings of my father's writing skills and his ability to create characters and he had a gift for it, and he started honing these skills in these days that later on, led him to be to intersect with the early days at Channel 11 when they were looking for content almost on a daily, weekly basis to fill time until those schedules got full. And so this is a picture of him, I think, 1950 or so? I think that's on the calendar there. So he's just about 22 years old, something like that. Here's another great photograph. You can see WBAP TV. Isn't that a cool picture of just early days of our TV industry in some sort of a talk show format? My mom and my dad get married in 1951. Her name is Ela Hockaday. My grandfather was Olin Scott Hockaday, worked for Texas Electric. We've all know is a guy from one side of the tracks meets a girl from the other side of the tracks. They had amazing connectivity. My mother was a photographer. She was also a writer, very creative. So they had a very synergistic, meeting. And so they get married, and then the little tykes come. That's myself and my sister. So he's starting his family. At the same time, he is starting this career at Channel 11. How many people remember Mickey and Amanda in here? Now, I'm too young to remember Mickey and Amanda literally. These characters, and again, Phil's going to elaborate on some of the more specific timing, but these sorts of things were going on with brainstorming sessions about how to get programming for children and other things to create these daily schedules. And this was going on all over the nation. But in our world of Dallas-Fort Worth, this is what a lot of you guys remember. And I wish, that those little puppets existed, but they've all, like so many things from Channel 11, no one really thought there needed to be. I mean, Phil was the keeper of the archives for the longest time and saved a bunch of stuff and getting chunked, of which the painting out in the lobby there that Phil told me about, that long landscape of Fort Worth, Phil actually saved that from KTVT, harbored it himself, and then when you retired from KTVT, you donated it to the library, didn't you? And that's Emily Guthrie Smith, who was a well-known artist here. Who remembers Mr. Tapioca? Now that one's a little bit deeper because I don't know. Mr. Tapioca I don't think he had a show, did he, Phil? He was just a character that he did for wonderful, wonderful character. Here's an early set of Slam Bang Theater. A lot of people have always asked, where did the get-up come from? I've got my understanding about what Dad put together. The coat, of which I apologize most profusely of not bringing it. I left it at Robert's house. That was his high school graduation coat. He just put things together, but he formed an understanding of being a proprietor of a theater. And so he knew that the backdrop of the Slam Bang Theater was going to be the backdrop, and he is the proprietor that's constantly getting goofed on and having misadventures, and y'all know it after that. Who remembers Hoover the Hound? Now Hoover, there's some audio, and my dad was Hoover. And he's just off to the left there with his hand in there talking. And about 10 years ago, a gentleman here in Fort Worth, whose name I can't remember, is a puppeteer. And he had somehow ended up owning Hoover in his home, not very far from where Robert lives. And I went to his home, and Hoover is stored. I didn't bring him today, but Hoover is stored at my house. And it had aged quite a bit, but this is a handmade puppet, and so it's a real cool deal. And so these sorts of things are going on where they're hosting a movie program, different hosts, different formats to create, again, that content. What about Cosmo the Clown? This is another great character my father created, or was created with the team. Back the day that we had the talk in Thurber, the gentleman came to that lecture, who's now since gone, and he was standing along the wall as Phil's doing the program, and this is the man that built all the sets. And what was his name, Phil?
John Perry.
John Perry. The man was a genius. And the backdrop, the movie projector, all these things were created by him and other employees just out of what they could find, cardboard, whatever. And so that was, again, what I found so captivating later on was what these folks were doing with what they had at their disposal there in the studio, Channel 11, going to this place, Harris Costume Shop. Many of y'all know that very well. The bulk of the things that came in those days came out of the Harris Costume Shop. But a lot of this stuff was just made up out of their imagination, what they could find. Now this part of, and who remembers Mortimer Moolah commercials? Now, I'm also too young to have remembered watching these. They were done around 1960, 61, 62. And I'm going to ask Phil to elaborate. But I did not really, I remember some of this, but I don't remember because I'm so little. But after my dad passed away, and I ended up starting to look at these VHS tapes that Dad had left that were taken off 1.25" tape, I had never seen the comedy of what this man did. And this is the most hilarious stuff. Not surpassing Slam Bang Theater, but I believe comic, it's a riot watching my dad. And Phil might elaborate a little bit about the nature of how they filmed and how much lead time they had. But a lot of this stuff was done with maybe an hour to figure out the next sketch, maybe not even that. But my dad channeled his Billy Joe Camfield, in my opinion. He channeled Billy Joe Camfield because that was my dad was known as Billy Joe Camfield. He changed his name later to William Joseph because he was a little embarrassed by the Billy Joe thing. But there's so much of my dad's upbringing and his real North Texas accent is in this character. And hopefully before the program's over, if we can watch a couple of these clips, it's priceless, priceless stuff. So just had a lot of fun with it. It was Texas Consumer Finance. And Dave Noggle, who a lot of you guys know is a Texas legend, was the narrator for every commercial. And my father would do his shtick, and then Dave would do the serious Texas, my dad would say Texas Consumer Finance, and Dave would correct him, no, that's Texas Consumer Finance, correcting my father. And then my dad always had a comeback, take a hike or whatever. It was really, really good. And they were very, very close their whole lives. This, is a photograph you've all seen. When my dad comes to the Slam Bang Theater part, you can see the glasses are still here on the table. They've broken and fallen apart. And again, I apologize for the coat, but the hat's there, the wig's there, it's all, people said, how'd he keep it on his head? There's probably a lot of stories, the amount of physical comedy that they did and that not always falling off in live television or one-take television. It's amazing. I'm sure my dad would have his own take on it. Phil was right there with him. He might share some of that as well. Let me go back. There we go. This is an early photograph. And you can see the apes are there, but you can see some other masks that are not the apes. And again, those of you that have heard the story and understand that my father took the 8 team or whatever from the Nairobi Trio sketch of Ernie Kovacs. He literally, honestly ripped that idea off in a beautiful way. And a lot of people in Fort Worth, because Ernie's career didn't last a long time, never knew the work of Ernie Kovacs. But I learned it years later. And so my dad takes a little bit, borrows it, and then works it from there. Ajax and Delphinium are the two that stayed in the mindset throughout the history. And again, Phil's going to allude to the fact that there could be a couple hundred people say they've been Ajax and Delphinium. It might be because different folks that were employees on the floor at Channel 11 did have that opportunity. I also got a chance to put the mask on as a teenager. And so many people did this. But here's an early photograph there. The creation of the complex has got a story unto its own. Again, Phil might allude to some of what happened with Mr. Perry creating this machine, but the more I study it and look at it, it's just amazing what they put in to create something that we saw every day. And then when it was plywood, and it was empty reels, and it was just sawhorses. You can see these are just unbelievable things that they put together to create these props. Who remembers PF Flyers? We all do. It was advertising, and that starts beginning of different things, whether that's fast food, whether that's PF Flyers, other things. They were starting the advertising. My father was in promotions. His actual job evolved. He did many things, but I think he finished his career as promotions manager in sales and promotions. So he was highly tied to the products that they were advertising there on the show. And I love that, because I remember my first pair of PF Flyers was a big deal. I think I went to Six Flags and got in a goat crapped on them or something at Six Flags or something, and I got in big trouble for that. There's a good picture of Ajax and Delphinium. Things just, they evolved. Look at this one. Isn't that cool? Spring 1962. You can see Bugs Bunny, Popeye, 4 o'clock, the Three Stooges, Rocky and his friends. So you're seeing Cartoon Clubhouse. We all remember Jack LaLanne. How many of you guys remember Romper Room? Yeah. And Mary Lynn, who has a story with Mr. Crow, wonderful story. She is a distinguished professor of psychology at UTA. Is she retired, Phil? No. She's still active, and she spoke at the 2009 thing at the Scott Theater, and an amazing point of view from her point of being Miss Mary Lynn at Romper Room. And I was on Romper Room. Other people were fortunate, but she was an amazing woman and had a distinguished career in academia. And then there's Gorgon. And again, when Nightmare is on, I'm still a little fella. Got a lot of you guys that are a few years older than me really do remember as teenagers, preteens, about being scared out of their pants with this. And again, this was going on all over the nation. And there was packages of films that were purchased by independents, and then they would have a host, whether that would be a mad scientist or like different ones. And some of these were in the Life magazine article that my father was included in 1958. And so he created this character Gorgon. And you'll see here when the presentation's over, these original mimeographed, everything from dollying to the actual dialogue that my father wrote, memorized, and gave as what you would call it, his talks as he would start each week in each show. Unbelievable amount of forethought going into this. This was not ad-lib stuff. He was highly literate, unbelievable dialogue, and the way that he created this character, has been critiqued by different people on many levels, not only as far as kids being scared, but as far as like the amount of what he was putting out there in his dialogue was on a completely different level than anyone else in the United States. And that's not me saying that, that's others that knew this field around the nation, that he wasn't campy, he was very seriously gothic, And one of my very first memories of being at Channel 11, I was probably 4, I went down there with my mom. Somebody took me down there. There was a on the air sign, that was right before you go into the studio at KTVT, and it was like, seriously, you don't go in there if that light's on. So we waited till we got permission, and my dad was getting made up. I'd never seen my father in this character, and he was getting made up, and it scared the living crap out of me. Because he wasn't my father, you know? And I remember sitting in there and watching them apply the makeup, and Phil can attest to this, hot lights, greasy. It's just a different life than today about dealing with that kind of makeup and stuff that was put on in those hot lights. But it was the first time I realized my father had done this other character. Great footage and many, many stories of which Phil and them could tell about the way that these evening tapings went and the content and what they did as they created these really, really special shows. My dad also did birthday shows. Did anybody do birthdays? Oh, look at you. That's cool. That's cool. I get emails from people all the time going, can you, I was on the program in 1967, 64, can you send me a copy of that birthday program? And then we always say that those things were never archived. They weren't purposely not archived, but the individual programs were never archived. So they'll say, oh shucks, I was kind of wanting to see myself on TV. I was on the birthday program. But you know, I get those communications from time to time. I put this one in here because who remembers Bubbles Cash? I can't attest to much of it. I wasn't, you know, aware, but he was a part of the media in Fort Worth, and this is a great classic photograph of Bubbles coming on the show to talk about. I think she was running for mayor of Fort Worth as a gimmick or some sort of a deal. Here's a classic one. I'm not exactly sure who that lady is that's doing that, but taking pies in the face, you know, is a part of slapstick comedy, and many of you guys witnessed that, watched that, enjoyed that. I enjoyed it as well. And the pies were classic slapstick comedy. And I don't know whether we're going to get to see the footage of it, but if Phil's got the time, I want him to tell the story of the very first roll tape with the pie in television. And he could tell it better than I could. Here's a personal appearance with Cosmo at a, you can see this kid's not really too happy about the process. Many of the memories that I've gotten from you guys over the years has been seeing my father at different personal appearances in different places in different parts of Fort Worth. And that really has been a real treasure for me. Because again, I went to some, but I didn't go to hardly many. But many of you saw him in different places for the openings of whether a car dealership, something at Seminary South, or at, you know, different things. And so that collective memory of you guys and the fans from around the Dallas, in the Fort Worth area has really been cool to know. And my dad made a little bit of money in those personal appearances, not much. Phil, again, has got some incredibly stories about the ending of my dad's career in around 1971-72, when the crowds at these personal appearances would become unbelievably massive. And my father was a little fearful of crowds, and Phil's got stories he could tell about. He was kind of my dad's wingman, and has got some incredible wingman stories about trying to protect my father from these throngs. They wanted to pull at him, they wanted to mess with him, and by the end of his career it got almost out of control because of the throngs of people that would come out for these personal appearances. The other small, brief part of my dad's career was a news, like a Today Show called Reveille. And I don't exactly know how long it lasted. It didn't last a long time, but this was morning live news show in a Today Show format with a different cast of folks that were there. And my mother made the mugs for the staff. And I still have this mug. Then you see it in the picture there. And she made this. She fired all these things in her garage with pottery, and it's pretty fragile, but I was lucky enough to keep it. And again, he's waking up early to get to work, do the show, and then he's got his day job, and then he's got to finish out whatever he's got to do at night. So very, very, very long days. The tall gentleman there is Bill Swift, piano player from around here, and I think Bill's still alive, is around the area. Again, I don't exactly know the situation behind this, but my dad did have some news reporting in his career at Channel 11. I'm not exactly sure which years he did it, whether it overlapped, but this is a pretty cool early television remote situation with my dad out in the field interviewing somebody at something, could be at Carswell or whatever. Here's another close-up of the birthday party. It had different incarnations of it. You can see the little fellows up there on the king's seat there, looking out there. Just incredible memories for the folks that remembered being a part of that. And then things change again in a really wonderful serendipitous situation that happened, that when the Norman Maurer, I think, who was Moe's son-in-law, they came up with an idea for this movie, and they wanted, and what they did is they invited the various television show hosts in the different markets around the nation, like my father, who played the Columbia Shorts, and asked them to come be a part as ensemble cast, if you will, for this movie. And so my dad was invited, and I think he spent, to me it was like he was gone like a month, but he was only gone like 5 days. They shot his part in 4 to 5 days. So he was maybe gone in Hollywood for a week. And it was a huge deal, big deal. Elston Brooks, I remember reading some articles, Bud. Elston Brooks is talking about what my dad needs to be aware of by going to Whiskey A Go-Go, or just, small town guy from Mineral Wells going to Los Angeles. Jack Gordon, who's another columnist that many of you remember, these guys were chiming in during this thing about our own Bill Camfield going to Hollywood. It was an unbelievable time for my father, and really, really gave him a nudge, that he wanted to still pursue something, and he was humbled by it, and it was a big, big deal. This tape, this reel tape that you see in this box here, was given to him, to the studio, and my father would go around, and I went with him on these, and he would go to school auditoriums, he would go places, and he would do a program about being in this movie. And I don't know how long the footage is, but it's, 16 millimeter probably? And he would thread that machine himself, play the deal, and then answer questions about it. And he did it over and over again. And some of this has been digitized, but I still keep this thing that's in that case that was sent from Columbia. And each one of these hosts got that. So it was a big, big, wonderful deal. My dad kept that chair. It was mailed to him, or had it, and he used it out in the backyard as a yard chair for a while. One of those cloth things. He looks, to me and my dad, he looked like a badass to me. That's a badass looking deal there. And you don't think of Icky Twerp as a badass, but my dad got that. Good stuff, great stuff. Had a wonderful, wonderful time. Again, as I said before, my dad, his career was, as a suit. Meaning he loved that. And Phil and Clem and all these guys were executives and were different professional positions at KTVT in their careers. That was their career. They were not their career to be Lavender Louie or Icky Twerp. They had jobs, they had careers, they had progressing through their careers. Again, Phil has a long, long career at Channel 11. My dad left in 1972, but most of us never saw that. People would come to the studio every once in a while for whatever reason. They'd see my father in this way, and they would never know the two were the same people. Never have any idea that there was this other Bill Camfield. I remember going to my dad's office tons of times at Channel 11 and going into his office and looking in the drawers, and like we do with our parents, and all kind of gizmos are in there. But he was in there and doing his job, obviously without any computer, without any phone, just a mimeograph machine and writing on pieces of paper. He was fortunate enough, many of us witnessed parades, growing up in Fort Worth, and I don't know how many he was in, but this is a great photograph of him being in most likely a Thanksgiving Day parade. And then things, progress over the years, and I don't know how many of you guys, by the time that Machismo, who was again a staff employee of Channel 11, he and my father, I don't exactly know how it formed that they got Machismo on air as a sidekick of my father, but in the last 3 to 4 years possibly of when Slam Bang Theater was on the air, Machismo was many times the sidekick with my father, and he still lives in Fort Worth, wonderful guy, but he was like, the women went crazy for that. He was a hottie. And he for a long time, my dad would get mad that Machismo's fan mail was outdoing his fan mail, because he was like Freddie Prinze. He was very, very popular. And so I got to know him, and I was on the show at some point a little bit. Now I'm 11, 12 years old at this point, at the end of the the era. And at this point, the tapings were still going on with bits and bumpers and stuff. And so I got to be around machismo at the end of the last years. My dad leaves Channel 11 in 1972. I wish I had a photograph of him walking up the hill. It's on the DVD. Phil can elaborate more about all that. It was a hugely emotional thing. My father was very, very, very excited as a career person to advance his career, and he went to become a part of the NBC staff in Denver, Colorado. And my mother, Shirley's here in the room. We all loaded it up, moved out of Fort Worth. She and I drove with my sister to Denver. Got great stories about our time in Denver. She was right there on the front lines of all that. And my dad spends 2 to 3 years there, comes back to Fort Worth, has a career with BCI in consulting, cable consulting, and that is stuff that, you know, there's not a lot of photographs of that, but he comes back, works in the bank, Ridgely Bank building, and never did the Slam Bang Theater stuff ever go away. Now at this time he's doing that. Clem are still employees at KTVT. The relationship goes on. People always kept asking about, would you ever do Slam Bang Theater again? Would you ever consider doing it again? The answer is always no. That time has passed. You know, I'm moving on with my life, which he really had. Well, he went to work for Fox Television over in Dallas. I'm not exactly sure of the year, maybe around 1982 or something, as a staff person. And that summer of, I think it was 1984-85, they asked my dad to reprise a Slam Bang Theater summer thing, just for grins. And so it was called Slam Bang Theater Summer Reunion. And it was based on somewhat similar to the same format. They would buy movies to play, and then we would do bumper comedy around it. And I'm telling you, to be honest with you, it was nothing in comparison to what these guys did. I mean, but my father asked me, do you want to be a part of this? I was back in Fort Worth living at the time, was single, had some time on my hands, and so my father and I would drive over to Dallas, and we taped, I think, once every couple of weeks. We'd tape as much stuff as we could, and then they would run it just like they used to. And I want to tell you a story, because this was interesting. I'm about, I don't know, 27 years old here, I can't remember. But the staff at Fox were young gun professionals, directors, cameramen, people. They really didn't have much of a frame of reference from my father at all. And to be honest with you, we were quite unimpressed with the whole thing of this format that they were asking to do. And the very first day that my father walked in and talked to the crew about the way he wanted the format to go, meaning one take, no rehearsal spots, just let tape roll and see what happens, you could tell they were, you know, just very unprofessional, right? Not cool. And he said, well, that's the way we're going to do it. So we worked on that format throughout that summer, and we weren't a great comedy team by any stretch, not with what Phil and Clem and them did, but we had a lot of fun. And it was amazing for me to watch that summer progress, that staff got into it. And by the time of the last 2 to 3 taping sessions, the sound man was going in there and dubbing sound effects. And was starting to play with the creativity of trying to intersperse sound effects with comedy in live real time. And it was really cool. By the time the thing, it didn't get renewed, of course, but we had a lot of fun, and it was really cool to see my father's early television approach, which was so different from what was going on at that point, that you could see they really saw it. They got it about what fun it could be to tape and to do television. And that was really something that stayed with me forever, because that was another generation. And where those guys are today, I don't know. But this is a photograph that was taken with me and the old man. He created a character for me called Mossback, which was, I duck hunted a lot back in the day, and I was kind of a yokum kind of a guy. So I was the hapless, you know, it was kind of like before Duck Dynasty was popular. If I had only known to say happy, 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 it could have been grown a beard. But it was an unbelievable opportunity for me to work with my father, knowing that would be a rare in the last time, obviously. And then in 1989, again, this was a celebration. I don't know if any of y'all were there that night. That was over in Dallas. Ron Chapman hosted it. And this was a situation where all of my father's colleagues are alive, and Phil and all these folks came, and they paid a tribute not only to my father, but paid a tribute to the entire cast of Slam Bang Theater. And it was a wonderful evening. I was living in Amarillo at the time. We came down and were part of that. And again, my dad allowed me an opportunity there at the end of the evening to come up for a quick bit and put a pie in his face. So it was a cool night. Again, Frank Benton, who we just lost about 4 or 5 months ago, who was Adolf, came back and was very close friends with my father. Was on the show just for early days, but he was there, and these other colleagues were in many of the sketches in the early days. So it was a beautiful thing, that I was very, very grateful to have that. Again, one of the things that I'm going to finish with is that as my father came back and was in those years, people would come and ask him, what do you want to be known for? Do you want to be known for Gorgon? Do you want to be known for Slam Bang Theater? And my father said, I want to be known as a writer. And so we have a writing scholarship award at TCU that when he passed away, and so there's a writing award that's given every year, a small amount, for creative writing. And it's a cool legacy, of which my son, who's a junior at Southwestern University, got to judge for the first time. And so his legacy, of which Phil will attribute, is deep, of what it meant to him. And I'm not saying if he was still alive today, he wouldn't want to talk about Slam Bang Theater and all that stuff, but his seriousness of what he wanted to be known for would be a creator and a writer, of which he was. And so that's my part of it. I want to ask Mr. Phil Crow to come down, and we're just going to share a little bit about what some of his memories are, and then we'll see if we've got enough time to maybe play a couple of sketches. But again, I've referenced Phil the whole morning, but Mrs. Phil Crow, you had a 30-some-odd year career. How many years?
Okay. We didn't have all this wireless stuff when I was in television. Anybody know Icky Twerp's real name? Not Bill Camfield. What Icky Twerp stood for?
Ichabod Twerp Whistle.
Ickamore Twerp Whistle. And it came Icky Twerp. Briefly, as Paul mentioned, Camfield's real talent was writing. He was a creative writer. And Channel 11 went on the air 9/11/55. Sid Richardson owned the station. And when we went on the air live at 1 o'clock in the studio, black and white TV, on camera was Dave Naugle, Sid Richardson, and Sid Richardson's attorney, who handled all the legal work to get the license, was on camera there. John Conley. And a lot of people don't know that because he lived here in Fort Worth in Westover. And then we know what happened, 1963. Bill's real talent, again, was writing. And what would happen at the station, the programming department and management, they would go through promotion of buying products to run. And we were an independent. In those days, in every market there were 3 stations: ABC, NBC, CBS. Anything else, independent. This is before UHF came into being. And so when we went on the air, everything that went on the air came out of our building. Channel 5, 4, and 8, they were a network, and they could, at times in prime time, have a network program and come in, they could stop and catch their breath. But we never did. And so what would happen is at the station, programming would go out and buy programs. So they bought the Three Stooges. And so Bill, being creative, he came up with the idea of Slam Bang Theater, a way to promote and running the Three Stooges. And obviously, he came more popular than the Three Stooges. He and I did a lot. By the way, I think I'm the only person that can say that Icky Twerp was the best man in my wedding. Groomsman, okay, yeah. And, but his talent, again, like on Gorgon. By the way, on Gorgon, Bill always wore glasses. He had poor eyesight. Well, he couldn't wear glasses as Gorgon, and with all the makeup and everything. Well, in those days, you didn't have wireless mics and stuff. So we put a wireless mic, with a mic like this, a lavalier, right up next to his throat, right here. And and then the audio guy could vibrate that and have that sound. Well, when we try to give cues to him, like he was going long or speed up or move to your right or whatever, you couldn't say that into his ear. Didn't have an IFB like everybody does now. And so behind camera, I ran camera, and later I became a director, and I moved on up to operations manager. And in fact, when I retired, I was the operations manager and the executive producer of Texas Rangers baseball. But when we were doing Gorgon, I'd be behind camera and doing some stuff, and we would need to give Gorgon a 2-minute cue. He's running along. Well, he couldn't see this. And so we would have to make these big signs and put a 2 on it and hold it up behind the camera, and so because he's walking around like this, you know, and he'd look at us, and you could see him go like that, wonder what is it. But he was an incredible talent, and of course, Paul mentioned the scholarship at TCU, and I graduated from TCU in '59. And I went to work right there. And in fact, I was on my lunch break at TCU, and Clem, another Channel 11 guy, had just started to work there. And he and I were having lunch together at TCU. I had afternoon classes. And Clem says, I think there's an opening at Channel 11. Why don't you go out there and interview? And so I called out there, came out there, sat down for an interview. It lasted 10 minutes. Things were different in those days. And so he said, we want to hire you. And I said, good. And he said, but here's the deal. You got to go to work right now, this very moment. And I had afternoon classes, but I said, okay. And I was there 38 more years. But I went ahead and graduated. But so he took me down, and not Bill, but he took me down into the studio, introduced me some people, and I worked till 11 o'clock that night. And then I was there 38 years. But when we started Slam Bang, a lot of people were involved in that, but it was Bill's idea and creative writing. So as it became more popular, he was more popular than the Stooges, but as it became popular, these other people would want him to come and do an event and at Six Flags and all these things. And so he'd always ask me, if I was single, he'd always ask me, why don't you go with me? I don't have any money, but I'll buy you a 6-pack. I said, I'll go. So one time we went to this, it was a Halloween, it was out north side at a school, junior high school. Did 2 shows. One was for the elementary kids, and I played Lavender Louie, and who was the custodian of Slam Bang Theater. And so Bill would come out and he'd do his Slam Bang, his Icky Twerp stuff, and I'd come out with a mop, and I'm mopping the floor, and I turn and hit him in the back of the head, knock his hat off, and all the kids would laugh and all that. And then we always ended with me doing something to him, and he would chase me off stage and then pull the curtains, and that was the way the show ended. So we were doing that, and we had a later show, and it was the junior high kids who were older. Well, the show started, and there was nobody there really in charge, and so these guys sitting on the front row said, let's get twerp, let's get twerp. And they started to come up on the stage. They wanted to steal his hat and his wig. And Bill he was afraid. And so I grabbed him and rushed him back in the wings, and I locked him in a closet. And all these kids, I don't know, 8 or 10 of them came up on stage, and they said, where is he? And I said, he just went out the back door and he's gone. And by this time, security came and got the kids off the stage, and then I went and knocked on the door. I said, come on out. So he came out, he was scared. And I don't blame him. These guys would have beat him up. Things got different as Twerp got different, got older. And the biggest show that we ever did was at Six Flags. What's that outdoor museum, that big, auditorium? Yeah, it seats 300, 400 people. we did the same thing. He comes out, he goes crazy, and kids are screaming and hollering. I come out with the mop, and we do a bunch of stuff. And I'd hit him with the mop and knock his hat off, and then he would kick me, and we'd do stuff. And then we would close, and I would hit him in the face with a pie. And everybody would go crazy, and he'd say, "Lavender," and he'd chase me into the wings. And of course, I'm carrying my mop, and he's chasing me into the wings. So as we go into the wings, this is a big theater. So we go into the wings, it's dark back there. Well, there was this guy that handled the curtains, and it's dark. I came through there, and this guy puts his foot like this, and he trips me. And I fall right on my face. And I get up and I grab this guy. He was, I don't know, he was 18, during the summer he worked there. I pushed him against the wall, and I said, "Oh God, what are you doing?" And he said, "I didn't like it that you hit Icky with that pie." And so I had him up against the wall, and they had a backstage policeman in uniform. He grabbed me, and he kicked me out of Six Flags. And when he escorted me to the gate, and Icky went with me. So we left together, But when the station did go on the air, as I mentioned, Bill wrote that script, the sign-on script at 1 o'clock, 9/11/55. And of course, we had a connection with John Connally, and when Connally was running for governor, because he was connected with Sid Richardson. Now Sid Richardson had died by then, but he still lived John still lived in Westover. We were not far from our station, KFJZ TV, and so we did almost all of his television promotion stuff and running for governor. And so we would go over there and do things in his room, in his home. And again, television was black and white. Videotape was what's called quad. It's 2 inches wide. A reel of tape was that big. And I worked those things with the soon-to-be governor, John Connally. And I was in his kitchen one day, and again, it's in Westover. And we had everything set up. It was early in the morning, and camera and lights and audio, and I was single, and I was hungry, and I was in the kitchen. There was donuts and a pitcher of orange juice, and I thought, God, I got to have some of this. So I poured myself and got me a donut and took a bite. And John Connally walks into the kitchen, and he had his robe on, and I tried sugar on me, and he looked at me. Of course, he knew who we were because we'd been there several times. He says, "Good morning, Phil. Make yourself at home." "Good morning, Mr. Connally. I'm so sorry, He said, "Nah, don't worry about it." He's a good guy, man. Paul mentioned Romper Room. Y'all remember Romper Room? Okay. Y'all remember Miss Mary Lynn? Yeah. Well, I've got a confession to make. When that show started, I started directing that show. And I started sleeping with the Romper Room teacher. Of course, we were married. She's Dr. Mary Lynn Crow at UTA. She's been UTA since 1970. And not only is she a high-ranking teacher, she is a licensed certified psychologist. A lot smarter than me. We're not married anymore, but we're still friends. But she was the first, and we had Romper Room with her about 10 years, I guess. What? Yeah. And then she went on, even while she was doing Romper Room, she got her master's at TCU and then got her PhD at North Texas. But there's a lot of twerp stories. Some I can't tell you. But his real talent, as Paul has said, and his real desire was writing. He's a very creative guy. And it was a real thrill for me to be able to say that he was the best man in my wedding. I don't think many people can say that. Some things about Channel 11, which was KFJZ TV. It went on air 9/11/55. And when Sid Richardson died, we became, a new owner bought us, and we became KTVT. And then in '62, Gaylord Broadcasting bought us, and then we became a superstation. And there were only a handful of those in the country. And of course, then we became a CBS in 1995. And then I retired. We were CBS, but we were still owned by Gaylord. And I didn't want to retire under CBS, so I retired under Gaylord. And so I still do some TV work. It's fun. I keep doing it because my wife still works and doesn't have to, but I still do that. And it's mainly, I'm still connected with Texas Rangers baseball and Dallas Mavericks basketball. Anybody have any questions about Slam Bang or about Icky? Yes, ma'am?
Was Romper Room a syndication and every market could buy into it?
Yeah, every market had it. A lot of major markets had it. The headquarters were in Baltimore.
And there was a curriculum. It was a series. The people that did that were serious. People had to go through some training to be.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I never knew that.
Yeah. Yeah, what would happen is that a representative would come from Baltimore and meet with us, and we would interview potential romper room teachers. And then we would select one, and then would change everything. But Miss Mary Lynn was the most popular and was the teacher longer than anybody else. And, yes, ma'am?
And wasn't there a show that went with Popeye in the afternoons? Captain Swabby or something? He had
Yeah.
a boat.
Yeah.
But that was Bill Camfield.
His name is George Nolan. Yeah, and he died several years ago too. Yeah, he was Captain Swabby, and it's a similar thing. Is that we had all these Popeye cartoons, and management wanted to find a way, instead of just loading them up, putting them on the air, some way to do creative and help lead into them. And so George Nolan was an announcer. He was a booth announcer for KFJZ radio, and he'd come down to do KFJZ TV. And so he created that character. And the set was a great big piece of cardboard, like in front of a boat. And then he'd stand, and we had a picture like this on a little different technology then. And Swabby would put on his stuff, and he would, the cameras in those days, studio cameras, were, you could pedestal them up and down. You could make them go up and down, manually lift them up, push them down, lift them up, and as if the boat was in the water. And so George Nolan would stand there, and he'd read letters that the kids would write to Swabby, and he'd read them, and he'd make some joke. He's a really creative guy, him, yeah. And he told me something one time, and I don't know whether Bud may know if he wrote this. I'd write him something, and I'd misspell a word, and he would always say, "It's a poorly educated man who can spell a word only one way." Yeah, Bud?
Oh, yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
Our conversation up here made me think, does anybody remember what they did with the show the day of the Kennedy assassination? You had to go on live 3 hours after the assassination, and they just go ahead with the show the way it was, or what?
Which show we talk about?
Slam Bang.
Okay. Yeah, it ran that afternoon, but what happened is that, that day, which is almost 50 years ago, at the hotel, Channel 11, just Channel 11, televised live the breakfast. And I was there. I worked that. And by the way, this is a little story that nobody knows, but that was a Friday. We set up everything the day before on Thursday. All the cameras, the lighting, audio, everything. Because we had to be there early Friday morning. And so when we got there, we heard that because it was a sellout inside the grand ballroom, that the president was going to come outside that south door out to the parking lot and talk to all those people out there in the parking lot. Well, we didn't have a camera out there. So we started running around and we got a camera and we got a ladder and we were going to put up on the overhang, we were going to put a camera, and again, in those days there are no handhelds. Tripod, camera, lens rack, and we started to take them up this ladder. And the Secret Service guy standing there, he knew who we were. In fact, I still have my credentials. 50 years ago, I still have them. They're in a frame. And of course, he knew who we were, and he says, "What are y'all doing?" And we said, "We understand the president's coming out. We're going to put a camera up here." And he said, "No, you're not." And one of our guys said, "What do you mean we can't? We're televising the speech inside." And he said, "I don't want anything that big and heavy up above his head when he walks out of the hotel, that something could fall and hurt him." And when I think about that, 3 hours later he was killed. But so we didn't put a camera up there, but we televised the speech, and that was live. And then we went to regular programming as he and the First Lady left and came at us. Matter of fact, came right at me. And by the way, let me tell you a real cute story. We were live on the air, and the breakfast was going on. It was packed, and he had not come out yet, nor had the First Lady come out yet. And I was running the camera on a riser about that high, and there's a door right here that goes in the kitchen. And so we're shooting people, and our announcer, a voiceover guy, was our news director, Ed Herbert. And he was just talking about what's going on, waiting for the president to come in. And I looked over to my right, and a Secret Service guy stepped out of the kitchen door. He stepped out like this. He looked around and went like this. And the doors opened, and Kennedy walked out. And I looked over, and he looked right at me. And I opened the key to my headset to the truck, and the director, Buddy Turner, I said, "Buddy, the president just stepped out here next to me." He said, "Cue him." In other words, send him in. And I didn't do that. And so he comes in. Of course, Jackie was not with him. And he came on in, went up to the head table. Everybody stood up, went crazy. He sat down, and 2 or 3 minutes later, she made her entrance. And everybody stood up again, and they went up, and he did a speech. We televised all this live, and then they came together. They came back at me as they were going into the kitchen, and then our voiceover news director, Ed Herbert, just said, "Well, it's all over here," and threw it back to the station for regular programming. And we started running regular programming, and then we started tearing the equipment down, and we started heading back to the station, which in those days was over here on the west side. And we were already KTVT. We changed, but when we got back to the station, we got a radio call, I think, that, quote, "Something has happened in Dallas. Y'all need to go to Parkland Hospital." And we did. This has nothing to do with Icky. Y'all care anything about this? Okay. So we quickly, we had this unique remote truck that had a generator on board, big generator, as big as that table there. So we could roll, and we had power, really unusual. And so at the station, up on top of the truck, it's flat, we have what's called a pan head, and it's right flush, and the camera could sit right there on it, but you'd have to sit down with your legs wrapped around it because it was flush to the top. I was up there, and we had cable going into the truck, had the generator going, and we rolled to Dallas. I'm on top of the truck. And as we, this was a toll road then, 30 was a toll road, and when we got to the toll gate on this side there by White Lake Hills, I'm not going to ride on top of that thing all the way to Dallas. But I locked the camera and jumped down and got in the truck, and we headed to Dallas. And just before we got there, we got the notice that the Kennedy had died. And so I got back up on top of the truck as we went through the Dallas toll gate, and we started recording and video recording. And we pulled up to the hospital, and again, nobody knew what was going on. The whole world knew Kennedy had been shot and died, and John Connally was in the hospital under surgery. And so we pulled up the back of the hospital, and I'm shooting everything. I said, one camera, And this is the days, and on remote cameras, you didn't have zoom lenses. You couldn't zoom in, zoom out, etc. They were rack lenses. And I had a 50 millimeter, 100 millimeter, and 150 millimeter lens. And I was racking and focusing, and I was shooting everything I could see. The hearse pulled out with his body in it, right by the truck. I mean, I could have jumped from the top of the truck on top of the hearse. Jackie Kennedy was in there, and they were heading to Love Field to fly his body back to Washington. And I shoot it as it goes by, and then I started panning around shooting. And who did I see come running along to get in the truck? Bill Camfield. Icky Twerp was there. Suit and tie, by the way, not his twerp. He was there as representing the station he was the kind of guy that was involved in everything we did. He was incredibly brilliant guy. And then we stayed, and of course Connally was in surgery, so we took my camera off, we rolled the truck up closer to the hospital, went inside, they had this room set up, and Julian Reed, you probably know who that is, Bud, don't you? Julian Reed was John Connally's manager, and he would come out periodically and give us an update on Connally's surgery, because there was some concern he wasn't going to make it. And so, of course, the station had a connection with Connally, and of course the state certainly had a connection with him. And so we would record these updates. That'll only be 45 seconds a minute. And again, you got a reel of tape, it goes through the machine, here's the take-up reel. We'd do that, we'd just cut it, the guy would jump in the car and drive to Fort Worth, rewind it, put it on the air. And we did that 2 or 3 times. And the guy would drive back to the hospital, we'd record another thing, cut the tape, get in the car, drive to Fort Worth, rewind it, put it on the air. And then when it was determined that he was going to live, we tore everything down and came back to Fort Worth, put all the equipment away. And I got home, and I can remember I got home about 24 hours after I'd gotten up, the day before. And we had a connection with Connally because of him living in Fort Worth, and a connection with Sid Richardson, and his family owned a ranch down in Floresville, and while he was running for governor, we would go down there and we'd tape some country and western music programs and stuff with him and his family, promoting him as governor. But his connection of he was on camera next to John Connally, next to Dave Naugle, when the station threw the switch and went on the air, 9/11/55.
I just want to go on and say again that what Phil talked about and what I learned as I grew older about the nature of early television, about on the fly, on the just thinking up as you go along. It was just humbling to me to understand what these guys did. And they all had daytime jobs, as we said, but the amount of stuff when they would go back in to the studio after hours, they'd go home and eat dinner. I'm not always sure if Pearl was in the mix in the afternoon. Could be always Pearl or something. Lone Star could have been in the mix. But these are guys just enjoying the creativity of sketch comedy. And again, we look at it today's world, everyone always talks about. We do have interesting things today with reality TV and the amount of stuff that happens, you know. But to know with the technology limitations that they had, what they did with what, you know, duct tape and cardboard and spray paint and whatnot, amazing, great things were done. And I'm grateful. Again, Phil didn't have the time to talk about it, but why we have these archival materials is because at some point, I don't know, in the 70s, y'all made a decision to save some stuff off tape without a master plan. It wasn't a master plan of, we're going to archive everything thoroughly. They just were doing it, you know, because they wanted to save stuff. So everything that got saved in that time period is all that exists. People call up all the time and say, is there more? Is there more? Well, Phil protected a lot more videotape, and he was the keeper of a lot of tape and stuff as he was at Channel 11 when they moved to the CBS building. And so he oversaw, unofficially as the archivist, more videotape. But after he left, I don't think it was ever malicious. I just think things get moved around. And so when we started talking about this about 10 years ago, you know, Phil had to answer that question about, you know, his custody, his custodial was what he had. But then what we have now is what I inherited from him. And an ironic story is when we were getting ready to do the 2009 thing in Fort Worth, I had colleagues of mine that were part of the Dallas Public Library who ran what do you call it, educational station downstairs. And they took all that instrument recorder tape, mastered it, digitized it, and archived it on a hard drive, right? And I saw the stuff, and we ran it before and after. And it was unbelievable. And this was everything had been archived. The day after we did the retrospective in 2009, because of library line item with the Dallas, they shut that whole thing down. Those guys couldn't go to work on Monday. And Lisa, I can't remember, she was my liaison that worked with me on that retrospective. That hard drive is somewhere down there in the basement of the Dallas Public Library with all this content on it, and we've never been able to find it. It's somewhere. And so what I've got is I've got the tape still, and I've got VHS, which is now toast. And so I'm hoping in the years to come that I can get away, because they didn't charge me or anyone a nickel to do this massive amount of archiving. And so maybe someday, you know, all this stuff under is pretty good shape. It's not torn, but you know, that was the biggest heartbreak of me. That was an exhilarating situation in 2009. But to know that they've done all that work mastering and digitizing, which would make it so much easier for us to show it today. We thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Paul, for being here.